Max is an independent consultant working with California-based and national advocates on water affordability and climate equity. And previously, he served as the Water Conservation and Climate Change Manager at the State Water Resources Control Board, where he led development of water conservation, access, affordability, and climate change policies across California. And okay, there you are. And under his leadership, the Water Board developed a statewide plan for low-income water rate assistance, acquired $1 billion for water debt relief, adopted a comprehensive climate change mitigation and adaptation policy, and implemented regulations to reduce urban water use. With 15 years of water policy experience, Max holds a BA from the University of Chicago, where the lead pipes are, and a master's in public policy at UCLA. Welcome, Max.
Thank you, Dennis. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here and always happy to follow Nusha, who is just such a wealth of knowledge. And we've worked together on a number of topics in water over the years, and she covers so much. What I'm going to talk about today is a 500,000 foot view of where we are as a state on water relative to where we are on energy and on housing, and draw some conclusions about where I think we need to go. Let's see if I can bring up my screen. All right, I think I'm now visible on the screen. So what I want to talk about is California water use in the context of our policy and regulatory framework that the state has developed over many years, and again to sort of compare that to where we are and where we're going on energy and housing. So to start, many of you are familiar with this pie chart. It's the state's emissions breakdown. And what I want to highlight on here is the electricity portion of the pie chart. There has been a real effort in the past now 16 years, in particular since the passage of AB 32, and you could even say sort of in the last 2 decades since the energy crisis that the state faced when Gray Davis was governor, on that electricity portion of our emissions portfolio, and bringing in renewables and efficiency and demand response and all of the dynamic market factors that are in play today. And because of that, what you can see on this chart is electricity now is equal in its emissions footprint to residential and commercial emissions, and slightly under residential and agriculture based emissions. It's really an area of ongoing focus, of course, but a big success story in terms of the overall this overall pie chart. Whereas the big slices over on the left, not so much. Although we're beginning to get there with broader adoption of electric vehicles. Speaking of agriculture, what you can see here is where the money is being made in agriculture. And the reason for bringing this up is because, as you probably know, agriculture is by far the biggest water user in the state. It dwarfs urban water uses. And to have a sort of water resilient future in California, agricultural water use overall is going to have to shrink. And really the question is it going to shrink in an organized manner or a disorganized and chaotic manner? What I want to sort of emphasize based on this particular slide is just where the big money makers in agriculture are. As you can see, sort of the biggest slice of agriculture in terms of net revenue is cows. The dairy at the top there, and then cattle and calves a little further down. That's over $10 billion of the 51. So about 20% of the total, just in those two categories. We often give a lot of attention to the nuts, and they're there too, of course, between the almonds, pistachios, and walnuts, almost as big as the cows. And again, these are sectors that have been growing. There are a lot of environmental issues associated with growing nuts and cows, and water is a big part of that. Now, I like nuts and dairy as much as the next person, but we've really got to get a handle on this in order to meet environmental goals in this era of climate change and increased aridification of the West. What you're looking at now is sort of where the water goes in terms of the major crop categories. And again, a lot of it goes to the cows. If you look top right, alfalfa, the single biggest slice, and then sort of bottom left, irrigated pasture. Those two together account for a really significant amount of water. And just to give you sort of some context here, this is the water that is applied to crops. It totals a little over 20 million acre feet, which is less than sort of the total that often goes to agriculture for various reasons. But this is the sort of net applied water for crop types. If you sliced this in thirds, urban water uses are about a third of this entire pie chart. So all it would take is getting rid of a few of these categories. That would total the entirety of urban water use in the state. And in terms of what we're trying to achieve conservation-wise, it's a very small slice compared to most of these. So, like I said at the outset, I want to talk sort of at a very high level about comparing where we've been and where we're going on energy, and how that relates to the state's housing policy and lack of policy on water. So on energy, as you saw in that first chart, we've made big strides. There has been comprehensive policy out of the legislature, out of our regulatory agencies. And that doesn't mean that our Public Utilities Commission and our Energy Commission and the Air Board and the Independent System Operator always play nice. But generally, they've been moving the market in the same direction. The legislature has taken a lot of initiative. And while we saw the close call just a couple of weeks ago with the extreme heat, the grid survived. And the development of increased storage, even better demand response policies, sort of the future for energy is looking good in California. And a lot of that is a result of this sort of comprehensive suite of policies that we've rolled out in the regulatory space from the legislature that are generally moving us towards a less fossil fuel based future, and that we've poured a lot of money into it. There have been very clear mandates set, including those that were just adopted at the end of this legislative session, and the governor deserves credit for that. And overall, society-wide, we're seeing a decline in the power of fossil fuel interests, and that's a good thing. Now, Nusha brought up equity in the water space. It's still a big concern. It's also a big concern on the energy side. We're still going to have these battles over, for example, net metering when it comes to who has access. and who actually benefits from the energy transition, and how do we ensure that the more marginalized communities, people with less income, who are not the homeowners in the state, are on even footing with everyone else when it comes to benefiting from the energy transition. Now, contrast energy to one of our other major challenges in the state, housing. It's pretty widely understood that we have a housing crisis, particularly so in the Bay Area. What we don't have is comprehensive policy. We've had various attempts over the years, particularly in the last 5 years or so in the legislature, of creating more of a framework to catalyze increased housing development, particularly dense housing, transit-oriented housing. The results of that have been mixed. But likewise, the budget dedicated towards housing development is a little bit uneven when it comes to the state. But I think what we have seen is that, for example, when it comes to the current regional housing needs and requirements on local governments to put in serious housing development projections, that the state is stepping up. I think everyone except for a few billionaires in Woodside was pretty happy when the Attorney General's office came and told them that their farce of mountain lion habitat was just not going to fly. That everyone needs to pull their weight when it comes to our housing crisis. However, we still have a local control regime where every city gets to enact its own zoning codes and its own permitting requirements, and that can stymie development in many cases, and has continues to. And I think, again, back to the heat wave we just had, where places are inland suburbs, places like Livermore, Fairfield, Concord, had temperatures up into the one teens, further straining the grid, whereas in our coastal areas, it was manageable. And yet, for example, the west side of San Francisco is almost all single family housing. That needs to change. We still have a model in the state where it's the suburban development that is quicker and easier. And there are all kinds of negative climate impacts to that model. And of course, in housing, we still have all kinds of equity problems. And I flag Prop 13 as an ongoing issue because there's been discussion of reform, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Moving to water. So in water, what we have, like housing, we have an existing framework that mainly perpetuates the status quo, which is local control, a sort of thicket of state policy goals that are generally in conflict with one another. But even where there is policy goals articulated, it often amounts to sort of all of the above. Well, we're just going to build a bunch of stuff and try to maintain sustain the level of total water use that we have had as a society. That is not a roadmap for effective policy and climate resilience. Unfortunately, one way water differs from housing, right, is the impacts of the housing crisis are visible on a daily basis to those of us who live in the major urban areas. With water, the impacts of our current regime for who gets to use how much and where and when are mainly felt by people outside the urban areas. They're mainly felt by the communities with the wells drying up because of major agricultural pumping next door, legacy contaminants in the groundwater, et cetera. So we don't see it as much, and that's a big disconnect when it comes to moving policy. Like with housing, it's a local control-based process, and we don't have the kind of sort of powerful regulatory regime we do on the energy side, which again I think is a major problem when it comes to having state policy that is building towards climate resilience and also equity. Budgetarily, and this is something Nusha and I have discussed for years, right? Every few years, someone throws a bond on the ballot, but the priorities within those bonds are uneven. It shifts the debt to the future generations. We don't have a funding model where ratepayers are contributing today towards statewide priorities. And then sort of corollary to that, the economic model for water in the state still, particularly when it comes to agriculture, allows for people to make a lot of money and then not have their financial stake in the consequences of how they made that money. Take, for example, groundwater overpumping in the San Joaquin Valley, which has led to land subsidence and all kinds of issues with then infrastructure. Due to that land subsidence, there are still people and legislative representatives in the Valley pushing for taxpayer dollars to fix those problems that were created by that overpumping in the first place. We've got to get away from that model in water. So to close, where I think this state needs to go is we need policy at the state level, policy and regulation on water. And we need it to be effective and well-designed, and it's got to be enforced. We have a lot of that in the energy sector, and the results are clear. We don't have it in housing for the most part, although we're making strides, and we certainly don't have it in water. And without it, without a very strong regulatory regime, without a articulated goal for how much agriculture we think the state can sustain as climate change accelerates, we are going to have shocks. We are going to have a chaotic transition of land. We're going to have price shocks, and we can do better than that. But it requires that top-down policy and regulatory design. And so often when people ask me about, well, I live in San Francisco, I live in LA, what can I do about the overall water picture? What I say is you can get involved locally. All the local water districts have public meetings. But in terms of the big picture, it's the leadership that matters. It's who's in the state's 2 Senate seats and what is their relationship to the federal agencies that have a role in California's water management. Who's representing the Valley, and are they more interested in supporting the status quo for big ag, or are they more interested in environmental justice? And then, of course, the governor has a big role too. And I think, again, while this governor deserves credit for what he's done recently on climate, he has not been a water resilience focused governor, despite his plans that have been out there publicly. So that's essentially what I wanted to share with everyone today. And I look forward to Q&A.
Thank you, Max. Let me just see okay. Yeah, so we should probably go from the screen to the video. anyway, we seem to be having, we had some problems yesterday with chat. And apparently today, in fixing that, there might have been something, some nested Zoom setting that kind of messed up Q&A. But the I guess the challenge of this of this particular time and your talk was just what you had finished in the takeaways, as far as recognizing what would be kind of a vision for kind of an equitable living water future, if you will, and and recognizing the issues of the localities, as well as regions, as well as the state issues. I mean, one could argue that our Senate representation for so many years has been really focused on support for cotton farming in the Imperial Valley. If one were of a waggish kind of nature, which I can't say that I am, but hopefully that will change over time, as far as resilience. And I agree in terms of the areas, as far as it's very interesting seeing both the market value of crops and then their water component. I mean, alfalfa has been in the news quite a bit lately because of its high water use, even more so than cotton. Recognize, and yesterday we had Lois Henry on with some of her views of things from Kern County, as well. And she said to say hello, by the way. So I guess elections matter.
Elections matter.
So anyway, I'd like to thank you again for coming on, and I'm sorry that it seems like the Q&A function is a bit screwed up, but let's pretend we're in the elevator, and I say, hey, what should we be doing at least even in the short term here? I mean, well, in the short term, there's an election coming up, but what would you say to that ill-phrased question?
I would say the state should be drafting an agriculture policy. There's never been one, and again, we need a transition to an agricultural system that maintains the critical food supply, but uses less water and preserves ecosystems, keeps community-based water flowing, and is going to be resilient in the face of increasing aridification, longer, more extended droughts due to climate change. And there's been a lot of focus on yes, capturing and storing the water when it does rain in the wet years. Of course, we need to do that. But that alone is not the solution, nor is it embedded in a set of comprehensive policies. We have a Department of Agriculture, we have a Water Resources Control Board, we have a Department of Water Resources, we have a Fish and Wildlife Department. Again, we have sort of a group of agencies, just like we have on energy, that have differing responsibilities. But unlike on energy, they're not generally pulling in the same direction. And we need a policy, and we need legislation and regulatory requirements to get us there.
So the kind of last question, which kind of comes up on your answer, I'm invoking the Felicia Marcus magic wand. if that were in your possession, and you were the king of California, what would you do in the water realm?
I would redo the entire system that is currently in place for who gets water and how much. And that's both for surface water and groundwater. And rewrite it into a new statutory framework, if you will, that prioritizes domestic use and environmental needs as the top sort of recipients of water in the state, followed by essential agriculture, and essential agriculture would get defined, followed by everything else. And sort of in doing that, wipe out, again, the entire framework that currently exists for water rights and the current way that groundwater is being managed under the 2014 law, and build up from scratch with a people and environment centered paradigm.
Well, that seems like a pretty effective use of a wand.
Yeah, just a small little thing, you know.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. Well, thanks for coming, and we definitely look forward to hearing more of these ideas and the subsets of these ideas in action, and see to what extent that will influence further decisions on that. And so we hope to keep in touch on those matters, since, I mean, there's a lot of obviously big rocks to move up the hill.
Indeed. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah.